Brian Martin is Emeritus Professor of Social Sciences at the University of Wollongong in Australia. Professor, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
Look, you've been studying the suppression of dissent for a while. Can you tell us what you mean by this and what your study covers?
Well, imagine that you're a scientist and that you're studying something that's a bit controversial. It could be forestry practices, climate change, nuclear power, trans issues, whole range of possible issues, and you publish something, or you plan to publish something, and then you run into trouble. And it could be that your boss says you're not allowed to give a talk. Could be that your research grants are cut off. Could even be that there's an attempt to smear you in the media. So this is what I call suppression of dissent. It's someone who takes a view that is challenging to someone who's got power and suffers attempted or actual reprisals as a result.
Have you got any measures on how serious, though, the issue of suppression of dissent is in Australia, and maybe using COVID, because it's a fairly hot topic at the moment?
Okay, well, let me go back to the early days, because I started studying this with environmental scientists who came under attack, and that was back around about 1980. So this has been going on a very long time, and it's found through nearly every field that you can imagine, but a lot of times you don't find anything out about it because people don't want to go public. Just a few prominent cases like Peter Reid on climate change. And so it's everywhere, and yet very, very low visibility. And certainly COVID, it's bringing out a whole bunch of cases. Nothing too surprising. The challenge is what to do about it.
So what do you do about it? It's if you look at big tech and all those, they've and mainstream media and government bureaucracy, any conversation about COVID, unless it's along the narrative, which is very lopsided, what do you do about it?
Well, one of the angles is what I call censorship backfire. And Sue Curry-Jansen, who's at Muhlenberg College in Pennsylvania, and I developed this idea. So sometimes censorship can actually be counterproductive for the censors. In other words, it leads to greater attention to the thing that's being censored. And what we did is we looked at the methods that censors, and it could be suppressors or whatever, people in control and who want to stifle some idea, the methods they use to reduce outrage. Now, people are outraged by censorship usually because it's no one wants to be called a censor. And one of the crucial ways to do this is to hide the fact that censorship is even occurring. And I think we see this with COVID, with Google and Facebook. They don't have a big advertisement every time you log in to say, we're not giving you results on certain viewpoints. They just go about, they change the algorithms that they use. And there's a bit of publicity, but mostly people don't even notice. And then a second method that is used to reduce outrage is to denigrate the people who are being censored. So we've got a bunch of labels, the conspiracy theorists or anti-vaxxers and so forth. So if you can discredit the people who are being censored, well, people don't think it's so important because, it's all right to censor a loony, surely. And so if you're looking around to see, is there something suspect going on, as soon as you see these sort of labels being used widely, then that's a warning signal. And then we come to the method which is probably the most legitimate, which is to give an explanation for the censorship. And it might be to say, well, we're protecting people's privacy, or there's dangers to the public. And you could say that's fair enough. And I think that's the area where you say, well, let's have a debate about it. Not just censor and leave it there, but let's have a debate about issues. And then there's the say, we've got the official channels. So the official channels would be a complaint procedure. You say, if you don't like our policies, then look at our regulations and you can put in a complaint about it. And that doesn't do anything. It usually does nothing at all. And the final method that censors use to reduce public outrage is intimidation. And this is where the suppression gets serious. So if someone's, you know, is potentially going to be deregistered as a doctor for speaking out, well, they're probably not going to speak out. They'd have to be very courageous to do so, or be retired, something like that. So those are 5 methods that are used to reduce public outrage about censorship. And I think we can see all of those being applied with COVID. And the way to challenge it is to challenge each of those methods. So that's to expose the censorship, to give credibility to the people who are being censored, to give reasons why we need a public debate on an issue of public importance, and to not bother with the official channels, and to stand up to intimidation. Sounds straightforward, but it's not easy to do.
Well, it's not, is it? For example, we're not a giant organisation, and that's probably one of the understatements of the year, and the year being so short. But we had a wonderful interview with a politician, Craig Kelly, and it went up for probably an hour and was taken down on YouTube. And we appealed it. We said we're just having a discussion, we're not doing anything else. And we got a reply back 2 days later, appeal rejected, and a PS, by the way, if this happens again, you're off for a week. If it happens again, I think you're off for a month, and then that's it, you're gone. So the censorship part, there was, no one saw it on YouTube. It was just taken off immediately. The appeal was dead in the water before we had started, and we knew from the start that we had no show at all. What does your study show, though, about, say, in Australia, about media and big tech censorship and the trends here? I mean, is it just one of the things you talked about, maybe just shut them down, or say that they're a crackpot? Look at Craig Kelly, for example. Labelled by the left and labelled by media, big tech, as just a crackpot and almost a dissident.
Look, there's no protection from these sort of things. And I mean, a classic case is Linus Pauling, who had 2 Nobel Prizes, but then when he took up an unorthodox theory about vitamin C and cancer, then he was just labelled as a loony. So it wouldn't matter if Craig Kelly was, the prime minister. You run against the orthodoxy, it's very, very difficult. And I'd say, your example, you've illustrated the official channels don't work. But the thing is, when people realize that censorship's going on, then they may be more interested in the thing that's being censored. So that's what you've got to rely on, is having alternative channels to get the message out. And I think the interesting thing about it today, as compared to 30 years ago, is with the internet, it's impossible to totally shut down ideas because there's so many alternative channels, social media and so forth. So we're on a different sort of playing field than before. Not that it's any easier, but it is. There are alternative ways to get ideas out.
Ideas and the sharing of ideas, discussing those ideas, and then you might put it in the too hard basket or continue later on. That's what we're all about, just talking about these ideas and developing. And for example, in science with COVID, I mean, if we went by the original, say, just in medicine, I think none of us would be here now. It's always evolved, and new medicines and vaccines and approaches are always on the horizon. In the US, your comments on they're trying to shut down the conservative media, and this is right up into Congress itself, with Pelosi and Schumer and all those. They actually want the carriers of that particular cable network, such as Fox, Blaze, American One Network, Newsmax. They want them to stop carrying that. That's another way of censorship, isn't it?
That's for sure. But I'd say my reading of the political censorship is that it takes place on both sides, and so basically whoever's got power often uses it to censor the other side, and that they seem to have no qualms about doing that. So it's very hard to sort of sit in the middle and say, I disagree with your viewpoint, but I think it ought to be heard. And we need more people saying that, but that's, it sort of puts you in the middle somewhere. Neither side really wants to hear you because they don't agree with the other side coming out. And anyway, that's my experience, is that I think we need a few more people who are looking at it from the wider perspective of let's have a debate.
Yep.
And your view may be goofy, but rather than just shutting it down, I'll explain why it's goofy and let people decide for themselves.
What about bullying by the media? We're not a large landscape here. We've got a few mainstream medias, and they always attack Murdoch for being too right. But you just look at news.com.au, one of the great left publications of the times. But the bullying part seems to be, it's like almost a pointing of the finger, shut you down, tell everybody that you're a wacko, all the things we talked about before. What recourse do victims have, though, in Australia to stop this bullying? And sure, we may be able to go down the legal path, but that costs money. And if you're a small operator, you ain't got much of a show at all.
Well, the legal path is a trap, because basically whoever has the most money is going to come out ahead. And the trouble with this is that one side has a lot more money, and they can just use that to railroad over others. And there's no easy way around this. The alternative, or the challenge, is to mobilize a larger group of people, and that's a slow process. So it can be building a network of people who are concerned about it, raising a different idea, and just gradually building the network, showing to the people in that network that you're sensible, that you're open-minded, and that you're, you might say, credible. And if you do that, then you can build up a following, if you like. Not following is not even the right word. You can build up a group of people who actually care about a search for the truth, rather than knowing the truth and shutting down those who don't agree with it. But easier said than done. It's not something that someone can do overnight, but there are people who are pushing in that direction.
But that direction in Victoria isn't welcomed at all by the Andrews government. That collective that decided to voice their opinion. I mean, we've all seen the footage, pepper spray and arrest. Even the media were arrested at one stage. That's another form of, I suppose, censorship by fear.
So the thing that happens here is that if that sort of control, you can call it social control, goes too far, then it can generate resistance. And so that's what we've seen already, is that people are resenting the controls because they're too heavy-handed. But the other thing we need to look at is that there's a lot of contingency. And just occasionally you get something that breaks the dam, and suddenly the alternative views start coming out. And you could say the Me Too movement was that. So we had sexual harassment and rape going on for a long time, but then just one or two people speaking out about a particular case, and suddenly a whole bunch of others willing to speak out. And so my guess is that when there could be, I'm not going to make any predictions, there could be a case where the orthodoxy or the establishment actually ends up backing the wrong decision. And we see this, you can imagine, I'm not going to predict it, but imagine that if a vaccine is approved, that it turns out to be more hazardous than the protection that it gives, that's going to discredit the orthodoxy. So there's a risk. Now, here's the strange thing. I tell people who support the standard view, the standard government view, if you shut down all the critics, you're shutting down the possibility of learning from what the critics have to say, and protecting the establishment, if you like, protecting the establishment from making a terrible blunder. And you could say this, that some of the wars have been fought, the critics of the wars were shut down, but turns out the critics later on are acknowledged they had a lot going for them. It would have been better to listen to them. So we can always, look in retrospect and say what would have been best, but it's very hard to do that in the current situation.
Interesting times, though. We have, look at Australia, look at the US, and we sort of follow the US. Used to take 3 or 4 years or 5 years before technology really got underway. Now it's within 12 months. Do you see censorship, aka 1984, do you see that being a continuing problem that will escalate?
It certainly seems that way. I think one of the symptoms of this is the use of the word conspiracy theory, which is tossed around to try and discredit anyone who has an unorthodox idea. And this is especially true with COVID, where there are a lot of scientists and doctors and others who are questioning the standard view about the origin of the coronavirus, the use of treatments for COVID, the control measures. A lot of critics, and you might say, well, they may or may not be right, but if you shut them all down and then it later turns out that they were right, that's going to be bad news for the establishment. It's like mad cow disease in the UK. Suddenly, the scientists all saying, oh, it's all safe, blah, blah, blah. And then, whoops, turns out we were wrong. Well, it causes a crisis in the establishment at that time.
It's questionable what is the next pandemic. Many say the lack of free speech and the control from state and a small number of large businessmen, which we could probably rattle off, but I ain't got a lot of money for lawyers' fees, so I'm not going to mention their name at the moment, but they're always out there. Professor Martin, a real pleasure talking about such a serious subject. I don't see it getting a whole lot better. I mean, I'll be struck off YouTube shortly. Rumble's pretty good. Locals.com's another one. But there ain't that much out there, and as they get stronger, unless you do fight back and fight against this unwarranted censorship or control of power, I think we're in, as they would say in the classics, deep doo-doos. Professor Martin, thank you very much.
Thank you. All the best.